Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
Welcome to the podcast. Chris Graham and Jerry Carter. And we're talking on a Monday, wrapping up a busy sports weekend, looking ahead to the week ahead. And Jerry, I got to thank you for joining me here. And I am still sort of coming down from a very busy sports weekend myself. How are you doing out there on your side of the country?
Well, there was an awful lot to process of the things that happened the last few days. And, you know, Chris, as I was mentioning off air before we started, a lot of times I do a pretty deep dive, if you will, looking for some sprinkle topics that pop out. But I think that we had so many core things to kind of break down and rehash. I didn't dig quite as deep on the, say, the 14th, 15th, and 16th thing we might talk about. Because I got a hunch we're going to talk a little bit about the big 5 or 6 at the top. And so my first question to you is, which part of Saturday do we want to talk about first? The part where of the game itself, or the part where what you had to go through to watch the game? And of course, by the game, I mean Virginia and Notre Dame.
Let's talk the Virginia-Notre Dame game first. Just I'm sure I haven't been able to address it myself. I have had such a busy broadcasting weekend that I wasn't able to jump into talking about that game. I've written a lot about it, but so yeah, let's go that direction first.
Okay, so I'm sitting there at halftime. I'm feeling pretty good. I thought the opening drive was as dominant of a drive as you could have. Feeling really good going into the break. Was there anything that you saw in the first half that sent up any kind of warning flare to you?
Just that the running game never got going. You need a running game, no matter who you're playing, what the situation is. You know, Perkins had a great first half, obviously throwing the ball, but that threw me off a little bit. That the run game couldn't get going. I'm trying to pull the numbers up here real quick. I had them kind of in my head. And I want to quote them accurately. So you look at the first half numbers. Virginia, officially had negative 2 yards rushing. Now Notre Dame only had 45 yards rushing. And when you take sacks out, Virginia did have some plus yardage. Only 2 sacks in the first half, 6 in the third quarter, which we'll talk about. But yeah, the running game not getting going, which it never really got going the whole game. Even with Perkins moving the ball so well with the pass, you just knew what that meant was, at least I feared what it meant was, that Notre Dame would be able in the second half to kind of, just kind of rear back and the linemen and backers could, if whatever packages you'd want to send, you could kind of rush with impunity, because Virginia really did, after not establishing the run in the first half, sort of just gave up on it really throughout second half as well. And you can't be one-dimensional. You can't be as one-dimensional as Virginia was and expect to beat a team like Notre Dame.
Well, you always hear the line used forever in the broadcast business that you have to at least make them think about the run. If not, they're just going to send their ears back and come after you. And that's what I felt they did. I agree with you there. In the second half, they said, okay, well, if they're not going to run, we're going to switch up our defense, and we're just going to play that much more aggressively. And it was kind of surprising to me. Even when the runs are not working the way that you want it to, because I think you have to keep trying just to keep the defense honest. And I did get a chance to read what I'm going to guess is your first story that you wrote about the O-line. Is there anything, since I'm sure you've probably written a couple more pieces since then that I haven't seen yet, is there anything beyond the O-line and how they performed that has you worried going into the bye week?
Hopefully the bye week is a chance for everyone to get some rest, but also that the linemen to get in better situations too. But I would agree, Jerry, with what you said there. You've got to, even if you're not running well, you've still got to try to do something. And plus, you're up 17-14. It's not like we're talking about a team that had negative 2 yards rushing in the first half and was trailing by 3 touchdowns, and you have to go out and throw the ball. You're talking about a team that was still up 17-14 at halftime, and everybody talks about halftime adjustments. You hear announcers talk about it. Fans will talk about halftime adjustments. Of course, they're making adjustments throughout the game. But halftime, you get 20 minutes to really sit down and kind of go through some things. Credit to Notre Dame. They did what you said. Hey, we know Virginia's not. They're not running well, so we won't respect that, and we'll rush we'll put more resources on the quarterback. And they did, and had 6 sacks in the third quarter, forced 2 strip sacks, 1 return for a touchdown, 1 return deep in UVA territory, led directly to a touchdown. But yeah, Virginia, it's easy to say now, and you get caught up. And I will say this in defense of all coaches, you make your game plan. You then at halftime you have a chance to make adjustments. Robert and A and staff, we don't get to talk, and I was not in South Bend either. You don't get to talk generally, though, to coordinators right after a game. You used to. George Welsh used to let us talk with his coordinators after a game. I talked with Tom O'Brien quite a bit after games in the George Welsh era. But I'd love to have would have loved to have been able to ask if I'd been there and if assistants were available. What was the thinking going into the second half, and why weren't adjustments made on the fly when it was pretty clear that Notre Dame was just not respecting the run? Brian Kelly said after the game, Jerry, and this is what really distressed me as a UVA fan, observer, and analyst. He said they were Notre Dame basically put 5.5 men in the box, as he said. What we call in the box is between the tackles and within 3 to 5 yards of the line of scrimmage. And normally what you see is if there are 7 men in the box, you'll think you can run against that team. If there are 7 men in the box, you got 5 linemen, and you can, if depending on your personnel, if you've got a tight end, you got 6 guys blocking 7, or if you can even sneak a receiver in there, kind of coming around the end and block. You think if they've got 7 in the box, you can run. If they've got 6 in the box, you definitely can run. If they've got 5.5, and when he says 5.5, they got their 4 down linemen, they have a linebacker, and then another linebacker who's half committed to the run and half committed to the pass. Brian Kelly was basically saying their second half strategy was, we're going to drop 7 back in coverage. That's effectively what they're saying there, or 6 in coverage. And we're going to rush you with 4. We're going to keep a spy on Perkins, and we're going to dare you to run the ball down our throats. And Virginia didn't take the bait. And he didn't say it this way, Kelly didn't after the game, but what he was essentially saying, if Virginia had committed to the run in the second half, we were going to take the ball out of Perkins' hands and make them run the ball, and we would have taken our chances there. And I'm convinced, Jerry, that if Virginia had done that, we'd be talking about an upset win for Virginia right this second.
Yeah, I don't want it to end up being a day where we agree on everything, but you beat me to the punch on that one. I'm sitting there, and it's kind of funny, Chris, the comparison that I'll use was just recently with, when Daniel Jones got his first start in the NFL. I know that Barkley ended up getting hurt, but before he got hurt, he was held, I don't have the stat in front of me, Chris, but it was like 10 yards on 8 carries. And Tampa Bay, first thing the coach says after the game, he said, we made a decision. We made a decision that we were going to stuff their run, even though we're going against the best running back in the country, in the country right now. We're going to stuff their run and make the kid beat. And I was sitting here in my mind. I was not surprised by what Kelly did for Notre Dame. I was kind of surprised that once you realized it was happening, and you could see it happening, that a light didn't go off someplace on the UVA side where you're sitting there saying, okay, I see what they're doing now. Here, we're going to go back to this. Is it possible that they think the option of Perkins running was enough of a threat? I mean, clearly, if it was that obvious to me, and I'm not a hardcore X's and O's guy. But that one was so obvious. I would be my question if I could ask somebody was, once they adjusted, again using the halftime adjustment, once they adjusted, why was there not a counter adjustment to it? And Chris, the other question that I had for you, in the fourth quarter, when they're still in the game, They're down 18. They're trying to rally. Did you have any question at all on kicking the field goal? At that point, you're telling yourself you need a touchdown, a 2-point conversion, and a field goal. Did you have any problem saying, okay, we're just going to get the field goal while we can, and we'll worry about the other 15 points?
No, I actually thought, hey, you're trying to keep the game going. You know, you have a choice to make. It's 35-17, so it is a 3-score game. And, you know, I've got to bring up, because, you know, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but I didn't have one eye entirely, or 2 eyes entirely on the Virginia game. I had one eye, 1.5 eyes. Okay, I'll use Brian Kelly. I had 1.5 eyes on the VMI game I was broadcasting, and I did have the other half eye on the Virginia-Notre Dame game. So it was 4th and goal at the 10. No, you got to kick that, because you do need a field goal as part of your effort to come back. If you know they had 1st and goal at the 10, and they threw 2 incomplete passes, rushed for no gain on 3rd down. I thought the rush on 3rd down was an attempt to, okay, Notre Dame's thinking on 3rd and goal at the 10, you're still going to try to throw the ball, so if we can, you know, surprise them with a run, maybe gain 4 or 5 yards. If you get anything like around the 6-5-4 yard line, you will go for 4th down there. I think that's pretty clear. But once they couldn't do that, no, I don't, because if you don't score there, the game is over. When it's 35-20, it's close to being over, but you're still a touchdown and then another touchdown and 2-point conversion away from tying it. So no, keep the game going, and that's the way to keep the game going. I was okay with that.
Absolutely. You're sitting there, but you see times that in the last 2 minutes of a game when a team needs a touchdown and a field goal, 4th down play, kick the field goal again. I thought that was the right way to go. And if you're down 18 at that point, I think that it was clear that Bronco was still trying to win a football game at that point. So I was thinking that was the right move. But after having processed it and having written about it, is there any last thought you have on the game itself before we move to some of the surroundings of the game?
Yeah, just frustrating. It's just so frustrating that it felt like that was a game that could have been won. You know, looking at the stats too, in the end, the final stats went very well for Notre Dame. Not very well, actually. 343 yards of offense for Notre Dame, 338 for UVA. So actually pretty close just in, you know, the stats. But when you look at the 4th quarter, Notre Dame gained 148 yards of their offense in the 4th quarter. So through 3 quarters, and Virginia in the 4th quarter only had 83 yards. You know, through 3 quarters, Notre Dame had under 200 yards of offense, and still at the end of the 3rd quarter was up 28-17 because of the turnovers. You know, so what that suggested, and of those first of that 28 points, 21 were directly off turnovers. Frustrating. It's just so frustrating that you know, this UVA team largely did everything I said that they needed to do to win this game. You know, I said. You look at the Notre Dame offense, and most of their rushing, 120 yards of their rushing came in the 4th quarter. They ended up with 178 on the ground. Tony Jones Jr. ends up with 131 yards. Those weren't yards that got them the win. Those were yards that protected the win. You know, a lot of times rushing yards for a team, when you say, oh, yeah, whenever, like, you know, I'm thinking back to the Redskins back in the 80s, whenever John Riggins runs for 100 yards, the Redskins are blah, 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 and oh. Well, usually it's because through 3 quarters they got the lead throwing the ball, and then in the 4th quarter they were trying to run clock and they handed the ball to Riggins and he'd get 1st downs, and that's how you'd win. That's how you'd close out the win. And that's what happened here with Notre Dame. They ran for 58 yards through 3 quarters. You know, they had less than 200 yards offense through 3 quarters. The job was take away Claypool. And Bryce Hall did a great job. He had 6 catches for 30 yards. They largely took away Kmet. Through 3 quarters, he had 3 catches for 28 yards. He had 1 37-yard catch in the 4th quarter. So they did what they needed to do. They took away the run game. They took away the pass game. And they were still losing 28-17 at the end of the 3rd quarter because of those 2 strip sack fumbles. You know, I don't want to blame Bryce Perkins He threw for 334. I will say this. We'll talk more about this in a couple moments, but I was able to watch the first maybe 20 minutes of the game unfettered. I was able to listen to the broadcast and everything. And then I watched maybe the last 20 minutes because my game ended that I was broadcasting. In between, I was looking when I could look, basically, during timeouts of my game and, sometimes when there was a break in the action. Doug Flutie, before the game, talked about Bryce Perkins as a running quarterback who wasn't very accurate. At the end of the game, Doug Flutie was talking about Bryce Perkins as if he was an NFL quarterback. So between that 3 hours, things seemed to change. The national perception of Bryce Perkins changed. But, man, I wish he could have felt that rush coming. The 2 strip sacks, it's easy for me to say. I'm sitting in a press box in a different football stadium watching this game, but, man, you got to feel that rush coming. If he doesn't fumble those balls, if he just takes the sack and doesn't fumble those balls, I think Virginia wins the game. Even with the 8 sacks, everything else. I think if he just doesn't fumble those balls, Virginia wins the game. So, yes, very frustrated. You can probably hear that in my voice. Very frustrated that it was that close, and the final score doesn't look that close, 35-20. I can't get it out of my head. If he doesn't fumble those balls on those sacks, Virginia wins the game.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there too. That would have been my last question, which was the bigger issue, the 8 sacks or did it end up being 4 turnovers?
5.
But
yeah.
Five turnovers, and it was one of those things. Because my point with college football is there's so many games on so many levels each weekend, and then people get together and the polls, so they have to come out. They have to come out, and whether you're using the coaches poll or you're using the writers poll, you're sitting there and you're going, there's no way. I mean, I try to watch as many college football minutes as I can on a given weekend. There's no way everybody could have seen this game or had an honest opinion about the game. So how much of it was about the picturesque of the final score and trying to project how they think the game went based on, because it shows as a 15-point loss. But as you said, it really did come down to just 2 plays.
Yeah, and that is a hard thing. I mean, I'm someone who votes on a lot of things. I vote on I vote on all the ACC stuff, all the ACC football team, the basketball team. We vote on the preseason predicted order of finish for everything. I'm going next week to the ACC basketball media days. It's one day, I guess, so it's media day. We're going down to Charlotte next Tuesday, and and I know the harder thing. It's hard when you vote. I mean, I'm kind of extrapolating out from where you started there, Jerry, but I'm kind of giving some inside baseball here now too. When I vote for, the All-ACC preseason football team, I mean, at least postseason you got some stats to go with. Preseason's hard, and then I'll be honest with you, they have you voting for linemen, and it's hard because I don't watch all 14 teams. I watch Virginia. When I have a chance, like bye weeks. Virginia's got a bye week this week, so I'll watch some other ACC this weekend. If there's a Thursday or Friday game, I can't guarantee you I'll watch those games, but I'll watch as many of those as I can. I'm also keeping up with other stuff in the world. But they're asking you to vote for offensive linemen, and there aren't stats for offensive linemen. There aren't great stats for defensive linemen, if you ask me. Nose tackles, I mean, if you play in a 3-4 defense and your job is to eat up blocks, you might be great at eating up blocks. You won't make any tackles because the linebackers are making all the tackles. So it's really hard. When I vote for basketball teams, I tend to have a bias towards what I've seen. Like if there's a kid for Carolina State who has great stats, but against Virginia he went 2 for 18 from the floor, I'm going to probably lean against that guy and go for someone else. If maybe someone else had a better game against Virginia, and I saw them with my own 2 eyes. So yeah, when you're voting for national polls, there's no way that I think last weekend so you're talking about top 25. There were two games involving 2 teams, both teams in a stadium that were top 25 teams. That's 4, and then there were 21 other games. So 23 games last weekend involving top 25 teams. Nobody watched all 23 of those games. Nobody watched more than 3 or 4 of those games. And you could go to the stats. You could, look at the stats, detailed everything else, but nobody does that. It's a popularity contest. It's a beauty pageant, and they're looking at the score. They might know the score. They might know Notre Dame won. That's about it. So it is what it is. I mean, I'm someone again who votes. I vote on these things. I try to take it seriously, but it is hard because of everything else you have going on. So I agree. It's a difficult science.
So now the story within the story on the first game, and Chris, I'm just going to open with my version of how the day went, because my Saturday was different because obviously Duke played on Friday, so I kind of had some wiggle room on Saturday. And you've heard me talk in the past about, seeing the blue turf last year for the first time. Well, one thing I try to do each year is I try to go see the red turf. And that was not quite as famous as the blue turf, but Eastern Washington, a perennial playoff team at the, I still call it the sub-level or the 1AA. But, you make the trek over there. So I mapped out a day where I was going to watch the first half of Virginia-Notre Dame and then see Eastern Washington play on the red turf. And then on the way home, Central Washington was playing a night game. I actually lined up a triple header of college football, with the first one coming at a Buffalo Wild Wings. So we had a foot of snow dumped on us in the pass, which is kind of funny for talking to somebody who's still on the East Coast sweating. But so our day became a scramble. We got to watch the first half uninterrupted, and the question came down to was I was trying to figure out, were you watching yet? And it was kind of funny because so I'm watching the Virginia game on TV. I'm following the VMI game on my phone. My buddy goes, "What's that about?" I said, "I just wanted this game to be a 7-3 defensive struggle that ended really fast so that Chris could watch as much of the UVA game as he could." And I looked at it, and it just kept going, and it kept going, and it kept going. My question to you, when was the Final Four of the VMI? What was it, 51-36? Am I remembering it right?
Yeah. And there was also a 2-hour weather delay, which, I'll give the quickest version of the long version of the story that I can. This is a tough time of year for me because I started doing VMI football. This is my 4th season, I want to say, because 2016 was the first, so this is the 4th season. And I've been doing broadcasting there with other sports too, ESPN3, ESPN Plus. I do the football on the radio. And honestly, I love doing it, and it's a lot of fun. But I did it, and I love the folks at VMI. I absolutely love the folks at VMI, but I did it largely because I thought if I did a couple years of it, I could kind of earn some sweat equity and maybe work up the ladder, climb up the ladder. And I'm not going to be able to climb the ladder. The ACC network it's been made clear to me it's not going to happen. So I really had a crisis this year, sort of internally, just like, okay, even because last year I was still thinking, hey, ACC network debuts in 2019. Maybe, I'll latch on somewhere and they'll need me for some games and I'll do some games. And it's just been made clear that's not going to happen. So I really toyed with not doing broadcasting anymore because it is complicating. I mean, our website, Augusta Free Press website, does a big part of the backbone of the website and how it makes money for our company is because of our coverage of UVA athletics, UVA football, UVA basketball in particular. I mean, the other sports great, but football and basketball drive the engine. And so, hear me committing to doing broadcasting for VMI, on Saturdays. There are games I have to, obviously that makes me have to miss some UVA games. I mean, it's just tough. There's this Saturday's football day, and I love the fact that Virginia's next game is a Friday night, in a week and a half. And they've played a couple Friday. They'll play 3 Friday games this year, as it turns out. So I've only had to miss one home game, but then this one was tough. The biggest game in 30 years that UVA football is playing, and I know already if the VMI game starts at 1:34 on time, as it did, If it ends on time, it'll probably end around 4:45 to 5 o'clock. The UVA-Notre Dame game starts. The kickoff was probably around 3:40 Eastern time. They'll be around halftime when my VMI game's over, and so I'm already guaranteed to miss half that game. So, I'm in the dumps a bit about this. Like, come on, gosh, I love doing the broadcasting, but I'm not going to go any further with it. I need to cover UVA football. Plus, as a fan, just want to watch UVA football. So, it was Friday and Saturday were pretty tough. I'm just kind of down in the dumps. Like, here I am and just whatever. So, VMI game starts. One drive each side. VMI Wofford. It's 7-7 with 9:37 to go in the first quarter. Both teams score on their first offensive possession. Wofford kicks off to VMI for VMI's second possession. And the teams leave the field because there's lightning within 10 miles of the stadium, which, hey, you got to be safe. I totally understand that. I could see it on the weather radar that a storm is coming. So, whatever happens, it happens. Did not anticipate a 2-hour weather delay. It was right about 2 o'clock when we stopped, 4 o'clock when we started again. Now, that did give me the opportunity to watch the pregame show on my phone. I got to give credit to the folks at Apple. My new iPhone XS, whatever it is, I had the NBC Sports app broadcast on for the entire. When we came back at 4 o'clock, we probably ended the postgame show at VMI. We ended about 6:45. So, and they played this at VMI. I'm kind of telling more. I'm making the shorter version of the long story longer now. When we came back, we had one issue at VMI. The VMI Foster Stadium. It's hard to believe. UVA listeners listen to this just can't fathom this, I'm sure. But Foster Stadium, which holds 9,000 fans, is a Division I AA football stadium. Does not have lights. So we come back at 4 o'clock. We've only played 5 minutes of the first quarter. Sunset is 7:07 p.m. on Saturday. We start at 4 o'clock. This game could go a while. VMI throws the ball a lot. They threw it 51 times on Saturday. The final score was 51-36. So the decision was made by the game crew, the officials, and the two athletics directors. All right, it's on ESPN3, but we're going to play this with limited commercial interruption. Basically, we played at the high school football game pace. They may have taken 1 or 2 commercial breaks. We had a 10-minute halftime. And we still finished at 6:45. So we had 20 minutes of fleeting daylight left to get this game in. My broadcast partner, Rick Cruz, who's a former VMI player and assistant coach, and he was an assistant coach at a few ACC schools, but he remembered in his early days as an assistant coach at VMI, I think he was still a grad assistant at VMI, he said there was a game that went to overtime, the early years of the overtime, and they actually said, okay, we're going to play the overtime on this end of the field, pointing towards where there's a parking lot right up against the fence. And he said, if we have to, we'll park cars there and we'll turn the headlights on and we'll be able to see. So that's the situation we were facing on Saturday. I was able to watch the first drive for UVA fully. That first drive, the scoring drive, pass to Joe Reed, and then I had the phone on right in front of me, right in front of my stats for the VMI game. The only problem I had, twice I wanted to say, because whenever I kick it back to the station for the network for the commercial breaks, and there were only a few, but I kept wanting to say, and we'll be right back on the Virginia Sports Radio Network. I had to say VMI Sports Radio Network. My mind was a little wavering there, but I think I did a good job. The VMI game had a lot going on. I was able to catch enough of the UVA game to be able to tell you what happened. So somehow I was able to watch 2 games, call one of them on the radio, and keep the job with VMI, and also do my job for people who read Augusta Free Press to find out what happened in UVA football.
It was funny because I was living that with you as it was happening, and the longer that I just kept waiting for the VMI game to go final. So I was thinking you would get a chance to watch the game. I was thinking one similar story that I ran into like that. Of course, the coolest thing I got to do in Virginia in my mind was the book we wrote on the Strasburg State volleyball championship. When they won it, and I had covered them for years, and I was doing that season start to finish. And Chuck McGill, the sports editor at the Northern Virginia Daily, said, "Hey, I know that Strasburg is in the semifinals at the state tournament, but you've got to cover a high school playoff game." Clark County was playing Goochland, and I'm having to listen to a radio broadcast of the volleyball match while covering the high school football game. I wasn't having to talk like you were, but I was having to try to pay attention to two things. It's safe to say I cheered at the wrong time a few times during the evening, but I was definitely thinking about your double duty. Chris, the next one on my mind here, and we talked a little or texted a little bit Friday night before the Duke Virginia Tech game, and Lynn and I watch each game together. She says, "What should we expect?" And I said, "We're going to win this game by 2 or 3 touchdowns." I said, "We're just going to beat these people up." So, the end of the first quarter, my wife's looking at me going, "What were you saying?" The first quarter was kind of interesting from that standpoint. And then, of course, the first quarter became a hiccup. And then I'm glad somebody went back and looked for me. I didn't want to have to research this. Because they're saying that it was 1974, roughly about the time you were born, that Virginia Tech lost a home game in this manner. So the final score, 45-10. The question I had is, who's going to get the credit here? Is it going to be that Virginia Tech is that bad, or that Duke might be that good? So while I was not expecting to see them in the top 25 at 3-1, I was expecting them to be somewhere in the list of schools where it says others receiving votes. And this, they listed 37 teams, and Duke did not get one vote in any of the polls. So then the follow-up half of that is Virginia Tech's next game, Chris, is at Miami. And Miami has had all sorts of troubles. And Vegas has Miami as a 2-touchdown favorite over Virginia Tech. So tell the people what you're thinking. You watched the game too. How bad is Virginia Tech right now?
It's the depths of Virginia Tech football right now. This has to be the depth, the bottom. I among the things I can't figure out is why Justin Fuente and his brain trust went with that 2-quarterback system that they use. Ryan Willis he's not going to be a pro prospect as a quarterback. He's a senior, the transfer from Kansas, second year as a starter. But, the old saying is if you have 2 quarterbacks, you don't have one. And, they alternated him with Herndon Hooker. The message boards until Friday night of the Virginia Tech message boards have loved Herndon Hooker. Everybody loves the backup quarterback when the starting quarterback's not the greatest, And so folks who claim to know a lot would say Hooker has been really impressive in practice, as if anybody actually who's on a message board ever goes and watches a practice. And we saw that when Hooker was in the game, he's pretty much a running quarterback. He threw the ball twice, and Duke figured that out pretty quickly. Hey, if this kid's in the game, he's not throwing the ball. But what that also did then was it took Willis out of any rhythm with his offense. I think he finished 8 for 19 passing, and so from an offensive perspective, just awful game planning and game management from Virginia Tech. And then defensively, part of your, a football team is a team. There are 3 units. We think about the quarterback, we think about a couple people on the field, but it's 3 units. It's the offense, defense, and special teams have to be in concert. And I was actually talking about this the 2 hours we were in the press box together. Rick Cruz, my game analyst, and I on VMI Football Radio. He's also a close observer of Virginia Tech football. He's got some friends who've worked there in the recent past, on the staff, and so we were talking about the difference between the Frank Beamer approach and the Justin Fuente approach. And the Frank Beamer approach was, your best athletes are on the defense. Your best athletes, no matter what, are playing special teams. And the offense, Tech fans would get frustrated, especially in big games, and also in Beamer's last couple of years when things weren't going the greatest for Virginia Tech in Beamer's last couple of years. But they get frustrated the fact that Beamer was very conservative offensively. But the way he played football was, we'll stop you with our defense, so you're not going to score a lot of points. Our special teams will give us field position, whether we're blocking kicks, which people people thinking of Beamer ball would think of the block kicks, but Beamer ball was not just block kicks. Beamer ball was the fear of the block kick making you rush your punt out and line driving it, and we catch the punt and gain 10 yards and get 20 yards extra field position as a result of all this. And then we have a short field for our offense. They always had great place kickers. They always played the kick return, the kick return and kick coverage. They always seemed to have huge advantages in special teams and defense. They didn't need the offense to be lights out. They just needed the offense to not turn the ball over, be able to run the ball and run clock when they had the lead, and that's how they won games for all those years under Beamer. Under Fuente, the best athletes are on offense. And the emphasis is not on let's do what we need to do to keep the score low. We'll win 17-14 slugfest in the big games. We're going to win 38-35 games. Well, which is great if you've got the talent on offense to do that, but they don't have the talent on offense to do that. And the emphasis on the offense is taken away from what Bud Foster does on defense. It's putting the defense at a disadvantage. They don't have the same attention to detail on special teams. That's where Tech football is right now. And so that doesn't explain 45-10 at home, but it does explain why Tech football, there's no identity there. And as Rick and I were talking about this, he asked me questions about Virginia football. As he's someone who's been close to the Tech program, and of course I've covered UVA football for so long. I think that there's some similarities there. When you don't have an identity, it's hard to win games. Mike London, I still can't tell you. I watched 6 years of UVA football with Mike London as a coach. I still can't tell you what he wanted to do on offense, what he wanted to do on defense, what his philosophy was about what his quarterback should be able to do. It changed from year to year. It changed sometimes from week to week. With Frank Beamer, you knew what they were going to do. With George Welsh, you knew what UVA football was going to do. They were going to run basically what was a 5-2 front. Really a 3-4 with two good rush linebackers, but it was really a 5-2 front defensively. And on offense, they were going to run the ball down your throat and play action pass. And they did that all those years, and you knew what they were going to do, and they still did it to you because they were so good at it. And with Bronco Mendenhall now, I can tell you exactly what he wants to do. He has an offense with a quarterback as a trigger who can beat you with his feet on the perimeter, but also is a big enough guy with a strong enough arm to be able to throw the ball. He's got physical receivers, and one fast receiver. And then on defense, speed all over the place. Everybody's fast on defense. And so I know what they want to do. I can't tell you, Jerry, what Justin Fuente wants to do to win a football game. He's been the coach there. This is his 4th year. I still can't tell you what he wants to do to win a football game. That's where Tech football is right now. I don't know how you change that. If you're Whit Babcock, the athletics director, I don't know how you change that. I don't know how you tell Justin Fuente all of a sudden, hey, Justin, we need an identity now. You're 4 years into this. We need to know how you're going to win football games. It's probably too late for that at Virginia Tech.
Well, I'm asking myself the same question. Now, I understand why Scott Frost was willing to leave Central Florida to take on the Nebraska job because he wore the colors. He played the position. He quarterbacked it for them in the middle of their prime. Fuentes was a hot commodity for his work at Memphis. And for him to leave that job and take the job at Virginia Tech, Chris, in my mind, he had to see Virginia Tech as a serious contender. That's just some simplistic logic for me. He didn't come there thinking, okay, I'm going to have to rebuild this program. I'm going someplace where I can compete for a national championship. That's how I looked at him leaving Memphis. And I'm in a situation to where we are 4 years into it, And again, I told my wife 2 or 3 touchdowns. My brother called me after the game. He goes, "Did you see 5?" And I said, "No." I said, "I'll give 3 touchdowns to Duke because they're better. But the 4th and 5th one, that's just how bad Virginia Tech is right now. Can they fix this?" And before you answer that, what is a fix? So let's take a look at it now. Cosmetically, they're only 2-2. You know, you're in a situation to where it's not a complete crash and burn, but your 2 wins were anything but impressive, and in your 2 losses, people ran up and down the field on you. So can he turn it around this year? And then give me, Chris, your definition of what turning it around is.
I don't know. I mean, turning it around for Virginia Tech fans would be going 8-4 or 9-3. I mean, when the season started, I don't know that anybody in Hokie Nation would have thought that anything less than that would have been acceptable. I think 8-4 wouldn't have been acceptable. I mean, this is still a fan base. Realistically, it's been a while for Virginia Tech football that they've been this good. But, I mean, it's not been that long since they had that long run of 10-win seasons. And I'm going to pull the numbers up here right now as I'm talking. But, so the fan base's expectations, there are still fans who think, we're still that team that played in the – they were honoring, Jerry, the 1999 team that went to the national championship game at Maine Stadium on Friday night. And, so you have Michael Vick in the house. You have those guys there. And then you play – not just lose 45-10 in a one-off situation. That'd be one thing. But, it feels like a tailspin now. I mean, I'm looking back – 95 and 96, 10-win seasons. 99, 2000, 11 win seasons each year. Let's see, 1, 2 out of 3. Let's see, they had 3 out of 5 10-plus win seasons, and then they had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 straight. So basically, 11 out of 14 years they won 10 or more games. But then the end of the Beamer era. 7-6, 8-5, 7-6, 7-6. So there was now. So Fuente's first year they go 10-4, and Tech fans are saying, well, and Virginia goes 2-10. And Bronco Mendenhall's 2-10. They weren't even that good at 2-10. But and if you're a Tech fan, then you're saying, man, look at that. Our guy came in here and he took right over. We were basically a 500 football team for 4 years, and our guy got us in the ACC championship game. We're playing in a major bowl. We're pretty good. And then they were 9-4, second year 6-7, now 2-2. I don't know that at this stage that 2-2, the way they're 2-2, that I can foresee anything better than a 6-6 season this year. Anything, and that's stretching it. I mean, they've got Miami that, like you mentioned, they're a huge underdog against Miami. They haven't lost to Virginia in all these years, 15 years, but it's going to be hard. I don't want to subscribe to the theory, throw the records out the door when these two teams meet. Virginia's that much better than them this year. So if you take those two as losses, Carolina doesn't look like an easy one now for anybody. The Jekyll and Hyde Carolina, I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit, but they've got Notre Dame still Tech us. They still got Wake Forest. They still got Pitt, I mean, this could implode to a 4-8 or 3-9 very easily. If that team that played Friday night goes out and plays additional games this year, if that exact team plays that exact way additional times this year, 4-8 might be a stretch. So, and if that happens, Katie bar the door. Those fans aren't going to accept that. They're not going to accept anything less than 8-4, and that ain't happening. But 4-8 for this program. 4 years in, you got to start over. And I don't know about. I haven't studied the contractual obligations to Justin Fuente. I think I remember that he signed an extension after his first season because he had such a good year, the 10-win year. That is something that ADs ought to avoid. Virginia did that after Mike London's one good year in 2011, and that kept him on an extra couple of years at the end. Make a coach have a couple of good years maybe at least before you give him the big bonus there. But no, it's going to be hard for Virginia Tech. Foster's leaving at the end of the year. Fuente is proving to be falling on his own face now. So, they may have to start from scratch with somebody else next year, and that's not going to be easy either, though.
Yeah, I'm sitting here. I don't ever want to see anybody lose their job. I've never been one of those fans that, get rid of this guy. Chris, I want to think Duke again. I'll give Duke the 3-touchdown lead as them playing well, but Virginia Tech looked like they did against Furman, and as they did in the most part where Old Dominion is concerned. If they don't do something, and this was coming off a bye week.
Yeah.
It's like in basketball when your coach calls a timeout to set up a play, and then you have a turnover.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a bye week. They dodged a bullet with Furman. They said, okay, we got with the help of the onside kick call, okay, we got a week. We're going to refocus. We're going to come out. We're going to play a national game on TV under the lights, and it's only a basketball school we're playing. I could see them going 4-8 easily. And it's the same thing. I look at each school in the ACC, and I try to see where are their wins coming from. Then you have a handful of games where somebody has to win. And this coming weekend, we have one of those games. Miami, who the only game they looked really good in was Bethune-Cookman, and is playing Virginia Tech, who hasn't looked good yet. So one of them gets to win this game, but enough about the woes of Virginia Tech. I have to admit, when I say I'm watching on the phone, the Carolina-Clemson game, I wasn't even getting to watch it on the phone. I was monitoring it on the phone. I had no shock, and I guess neither did Dabo. Dabo said the same thing. When Mac Brown got within one, I was sure he was going to go for two. Dabo said the same thing. So the roller coaster that is North Carolina, they've had 5 games. Each one of them has really come down to the last possession. And the peaks and valleys in this process, you got to ask yourself, which is the real North Carolina team? The team that came up just short on the road at Wake. They came up just short at home against Clemson and missed a field goal at the end against Appalachian State. So I think of all the teams in the ACC, they played 5 games. They haven't had a bye week. I still think that right now North Carolina is the biggest question mark. Which way do you see it going for them from here?
Well, I'll say this. I wrote a column on this last night, and I started out with a funny thing happened on the way to Clemson playing Virginia in the ACC championship game, and that thing is North Carolina. That's the funny thing that happened. All of a sudden, and I'm not saying Carolina is going to play in the ACC championship game, but they did 2 things. One, and Duke plays into this too, and I kind of wrote that later in the column. But part of my thinking, and we've talked about this a lot, Jerry, for the most part, you would agreed. But now I think the ACC is definitely much more interesting than it was 48 hours ago, and it's because of that Clemson-Carolina game. The idea was that the ACC Coastal was weaker, and so Virginia might run through that side of things. They've already beaten Florida State. They've got Louisville as their other crossover matchup. So the early season, the before the season thinking for me was, beat Florida State, and you could go 8-0 in the ACC. You're on your side with your schedule in the ACC. Even give you one slip up, you're 7-1. And so, but now Carolina, it depends on which team shows up, but that game for Virginia is in Chapel Hill. So, they've lost to Appalachian State and lost on a missed 2-point conversion to Clemson in back-to-back weeks there now. So, Jekyll and Hyde. And then Duke, obviously, too. Duke with that impressive win over Virginia Tech. I still think the jury's out on Duke. I wasn't convinced that was a 5-touchdown win for Duke as much as it was a 5-touchdown loss for Virginia Tech. But we'll see when Tech matches up with Miami this weekend. If Tech hangs with Miami, I still don't know that justifies Tech because Miami's still very much an uncertainty. But if Tech goes and gets blown out by Miami, then that would tell a different story about that. But I guess what I'm getting to there is the Coastal is certainly not as free of potential landmines as it seemed to be before the season started. And then Clemson isn't as indomitable as we thought 48 hours ago, roughly. I guess 48 hours ago from when we're talking right now would have been right before the kickoff there. So of that game. So, Clemson looked like they were just going to waltz right into the ACC championship game, probably waltz through that too and just go into the playoff, and we already had them anointed in that respect. But not only do you have the question marks, just, okay, they only beat Carolina by 1, but, Trevor Lawrence has been underwhelming. He's got 6 interceptions this year. Travis Etienne has 500, right around 500 and some yards, just over 500 yards rushing in 5 games. 205 of those came against Georgia Tech, and 90 was on one run. So, those are the 2 guys that were like the 2 favorites for ACC Player of the Year. They're both not living up to expectations. And so, Clemson all of a sudden is not unconquerable. They're fortunate that that last year's Syracuse team isn't this year's Syracuse team, or they might be even more so. Wake Forest has, I think right now, their guy is you got to look at him as the best quarterback statistically, certainly in the ACC right now. And they still got to play them. So that one game changed all that around. I wouldn't have even changed too much, Jerry. If Clemson had blown out North Carolina, I'm still thinking Clemson's going to roll through the Atlantic. Virginia's probably the Virginia-Duke game is a big one, but other than that, Virginia's the winner of that game, and maybe it's even if Virginia loses that game, I still think Virginia goes 7-1 in the in their ACC schedule, and goes to the ACC championship game. That one game, that Clemson-Carolina game, has got me thinking completely differently about how this whole ACC football season is going to shake out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a number of things. I'm sitting here now looking. My focus is on the Coastal, and obviously it's a two-headed thing for me. For me, I might be the only person that'll say this out loud. Duke and Virginia are just mirror images of each other. One at the private school and one at the public school. Obviously, my tie to Virginia is stronger because my daughter actually has the piece of paper on the wall. But because I'm going to go out on a limb and just say straight up, one of us is going to Charlotte this year. I just don't see anybody else that could come out of this equation from where they're already at. You can't. Georgia Tech, I'm not sure Georgia Tech's going to win another ball game. They scored 2 points against Temple after losing to the Citadel, and I think they edged somebody for that one win. So you could remove Georgia Tech from the equation. Virginia Tech's already lost twice. They're not going to run the table. Miami has there's all sorts of struggles there. And while North Carolina, is having a much better season than we thought. You go through the process of elimination. Pitt, once again, they did beat Central Florida, because they were at home with Delaware this week. Yeah. And had to put down a fourth quarter drive to beat Delaware 17-14. Yeah. So I'm sitting here in my mind, there's the 2 things that would cause me to get on a plane. At this point in my life is a game in Charlotte for Duke or keeping the bowl streak alive. So I was sitting at the Virginia Tech game. I looked at my wife. I said, either Chris or I are going to be in Charlotte watching a football game. I just don't see how anybody else out of the Coastal side could make up enough ground to become a serious threat. And it's kind of funny, because Duke has been in recent history, and Virginia hasn't. I'm pulling for it to be Virginia. But at the same time, I'm pretty excited because in my mind, if it's not Virginia, it's Duke. I just seeing it, and as I mentioned to you, I was starting to notice things during the Middle Tennessee State game, and I'm thinking, okay, these guys are even better, and they're going to do nothing but get better And I know that was as much Virginia Tech being ill-prepared. Now, my question to you, going back to Fuentes for a second, you go to Miami, and you're playing a less than stellar Miami team. Is there any scenario in your mind that Fuentes doesn't finish the season? If they go down there and lay an egg in Miami and get beat like they did by Duke, is there any scenario where you think Virginia Tech would have to make the change before the end of the year?
I don't think so, and I think it for this reason. They've already had their bye week. They had an early, because both Duke and Virginia Tech had a bye week going into their game Friday night. And athletics directors who will make this kind of a change in season would tend to do so with a bye week, to have a week to get everybody kind of coalesced after the change would be made. The one thing that could make you think it would be possible could be that you could make Bud Foster your interim coach. He's on his way out the door, either upstairs or somewhere else. But he is someone who's, at least on paper. I'm sure if you did make a change mid-season, you could make Bud your interim. If things turned around, you could consider to hire him full time. I doubt he would turn down the opportunity to at least interview for a full-time head coach job there, given his longevity at Virginia Tech. But you would have an experienced guy there. I often when I hear about either NFL teams, because football is the hardest one. Basketball and baseball, there are different elements to go into with a midseason coaching change. But with football, boy, I'm always against a midseason coaching change, because usually you're just elevating someone from the staff, and what are you doing differently? Like if you fire Fuente, for example, what kind of offense are you running? Because he's effectively the offensive coordinator. He's not the offensive coordinator, but he's an offensive guy. So what do you do differently? If you're just doing it to send a message that we're going to look for a new coach, that's a different thing. But if you had Foster elevated to the interim as an interim head coach, just kind of thinking out loud, and I don't think this is at all likely to happen, but if you did that, Foster as head coach, interim head coach as he may be, could say, we're going to play Bud Foster, Frank Beamer football for a couple weeks here and see what goes on. So, so my thinking about midseason changes, which is you really don't change anything, you just kind of fire the head guy just to send a message to everybody, that would be different at Virginia Tech if you were to make Bud the interim. I don't see it happening. Again, because I think the lack of a bye week is a big factor there. If you play a game on a Saturday night and you fire the coach on Sunday morning, and on Monday, say it's Bud Foster as your interim, you're wasting a couple days there just reassuring the players that their scholarships are going to be okay and blah blah blah, and then you got to get ready for whoever you're playing the next Saturday. That's hard. At least with a bye week, you got some time to assuage all the egos and all the hurt feelings and all that kind of stuff, and then you can refocus on football. So I don't see it happening with that. But that said, boy, they get they're 2-2 now. It's one among the uglier 2-2s you'll see. Okay, so I might go back on what I just said. They get blown out by Miami this weekend. They play Rhode Island in Blacksburg on October 12th. That's not a bye week, but that's as close to one as you'll ever see. If Miami lays a 45-10 whooping on them like Duke did this past weekend, I don't know. 5% chance instead of a 0% chance. So there's a sliver of chance there, but I don't see it happening. But I do see that if this team does, Jerry, go 4-8, even 5-7 this year, I see that there's going to be some pressure on, not just on Fuente, but there'll be pressure on Whit Babcock to deal with Fuente, given not just the record, but just how many players were in the transfer portal this offseason, how it just seems like that whole program is in disarray. If they turn that into another bad season and it's an under 500 season, I don't see how he survives it.
I would agree with that. Now we're going to go to the other end of the spectrum. It was really cool this week in the poll for the first time Chris, in 11 seasons, Wake Forest. Now, I said a few weeks ago, I looked at their schedule and said, if they, I think they got a shot at 7-0. Chris, I'm not sure they couldn't go 10-2, looking at the games that they have left. So, are you happy for Wake, and what do you see for them going forward?
Yeah, the schedule very favorable for Wake Forest. In that sense, just like with Virginia, I think that the schedule is pretty favorable for Virginia, obviously. But you look at the schedule for Wake Forest, from this point out, and you got to feel pretty good about. When I looked at the ESPN FPI, the Football Power Index, a couple weeks ago. I projected out 10-2 based on where they were at the time. You got Louisville, you got Florida State, both at home. Florida State, is playing better now. So, and they're talented. They got to figure out how to use that talent. But, so mark that one down, October 19th. That's going to be a big weekend. Wake Forest and Florida State, UVA Duke. I'll be in the stadium for UVA Duke. But then they got a week off. Then November is NC State, Virginia Tech, Clemson, and Duke. I mean, it's not easy. That Florida State game will be key. Going into that off week, if they can win, let's see, this weekend they've got Louisville. They're on an off week now too. They got 2 bye weeks there. That's interesting. They've got Louisville at home, which I think is a win for them. And then Florida State, I'm not writing Florida State off at this. I mean, I said after that game in Charlottesville, which dropped them to 1-2, that Florida State team that I watch with my own eyes, and again, I've got a recency bias, I've got an eye test bias. My own eye test tells me a lot more than what I see on TV or read about or that kind of thing. The team that I watched in Charlottesville a few weeks ago is an 8-win team in my mind. And so, but if they get past Florida State, then it's still a tough November. I mean, NC State is probably a winnable game. Tech is probably a winnable game, but it's at Tech, at Clemson, and then Duke at home. I mean, they could conceivably start, with a 7-0 record, and then still lose 3 or 4 games and be playing well to lose 3 or 4 games. That's a tough schedule coming up. After the Louisville game, they finish with Syracuse at Syracuse. That's a game that, again, a very winnable game, but also it's on the road. So, I mean, Wake Forest has still got to make me believe a little bit more. I'm starting to believe, but I want to see it a little bit more. But I mentioned earlier, their quarterback, statistically right now, the best quarterback in the ACC, and they've won tough games week after week. So, they've done what they needed to do this stage. I still need to see a little bit more for my sake.
Well, it's going to be interesting because I noticed that Florida State put together a complete game this week. There was no second half meltdown, and Chris, of their 4 touchdowns, 3 of them were of the big play variety. They had 3 touchdowns out of 4 that were over 40 yards. So, again, the offense hasn't really been the issue. It'll be interesting. As far as the schedule, Chris, for this week goes, I just wanted to ask you, I'm going to ask you this in a different manner. Virginia has a bye, and here's what you've got. You've got Boston College at Louisville. Louisville is a 4-point favorite. You got Pitt at Duke, Duke being a 5.5-point favorite. Virginia Tech at Miami, Miami being a 14-point favorite, and UNC as a 9-point favorite at Georgia Tech. As a fan, and your team has a bye week, and you could go to one of those 4 games and focus on one of those 4 games, which is the most appealing one for you?
The Pitt-Duke game. And I got to correct myself from earlier, then I'll get back to what you're talking about there. There is another bye week for Virginia Tech. I overlooked it. Between the Carolina and Notre Dame games, between October 9th, they're off to October 26th. So there is a bye week there for Tech if Babcock wants to take advantage of that before Notre Dame. So, yeah, looking at the ACC football schedule this week, yeah, Pitt-Duke, no question. Because, I've been using the term Jekyll and Hyde to talk about Carolina. The Pitt team is another Jekyll and Hyde team. They lost to Virginia pretty convincingly, 30-14 at home in the opener. They played Penn State basically even. They lost 17-10. They had 4th and goal to one of the fourth quarter. Decided Marduzzi just goes for a field goal and it clanks. Nobody else even goes for the field goal, much less misses it. And then they beat Central Florida, but then they barely beat Delaware. So maybe chalk that one up to the the classic trap game kind of thing. You just beat Central Florida, big win. You got Duke next week. You're playing Delaware, so maybe the attention's not there where it needed to be. But man, that's going to be a good one, and that's 8 o'clock Saturday night. So, which tells me, without even looking at the schedule, that's probably an ACC Network game, which means I won't be able to watch it because I'm once again off the ACC Network. Maybe I'll have to get the YouTube TV fired back up. The Virginia Tech and Miami game is certainly one that has a lot of attention for me. If only because my wife is a Virginia Tech alum and her sister's a Miami alum, and her sister was a football trainer at Miami back in the 90s. So, and Crystal's a big sports fan, so I'm very lucky in that respect. But that's the family rivalry there, and but also, yeah, that's I was getting ready to say elimination game. I mean, I don't know if it's an elimination game, but Tech's probably already eliminated from division contention in a sense, not certainly mathematically, but they lose that one, and really things come off the rails. They lose it badly, it really can. But if they win that game and Miami loses, then Miami's got some interesting issues too. So, Boston College Louisville could be interesting in a different respect, just because Boston College, another Jekyll and Hyde team. They played well in the loss to Wake. They didn't play so well, obviously, in the loss to Kansas. And they beat Virginia Tech. That one will be something you'll have on in the background as you're waiting for the 3:30 kickoff Virginia Tech Miami, and then you're waiting even more for the Duke Pitt game. But I'm glad to see the Duke Pitt game in prime time. That's that's going to be a heavyweight matchup, and it is an elimination game for Pitt. They've lost one in the ACC already this year. It was to Virginia, a team that's looked at as a team that will be in there at the end. They cannot, if they want to be back in that ACC championship game, Pitt cannot afford another loss. And so, game is in Durham, but you know that you're going to get the best shot from Pitt. And the last few years, that game has been a pretty good game. So, definitely looking forward to that one.
Well, it's going to be interesting because, again, the conversation I was having with Lynn before the Virginia Tech game, I said this is a two-game swing. If you go into Blacksburg and play the way you're capable of playing, I said the momentum you're going to take into the ACC home opener with Pitt, then you have the Georgia Tech game, following. And you can't count any game as, all we have to do is show up. But it's, with Georgia Tech this year, that's as close as you can get. So I'm sitting there going, that brings us to Charlottesville, two teams, the only two teams in the Coastal with no losses on, in league play. And that again, as a fan of both games for a long period of time, and there's been many a bad team, many a bad football game, just to be able to have the podcast that week and just say, here we are, we're talking about the showdown to see who's going to Charlotte. I just think that would be kind of fun. Hey, I want to switch up just for a second. One brief Daniel Jones note here. I'm laughing because after the Giants started out 0-2, they gave up on the year. We're dead in the water. We got no hope. They put Daniel Jones in. 2 weeks later, Chris, after Dallas lost last night, they're a game out of first place. I was sitting there just chuckling about that. And I also got a kick out of the Giants coach yesterday in the post-game interview. He actually said that Daniel Jones is smarter than him and his staff. And he goes, I can't speak for you guys here in the press, but he's a pretty bright fellow. I made me smile to think that, again, he didn't play as well against the Redskins as he did against Tampa Bay, but played well enough to get the win. So kudos there on them being 2-2. Of course, the NFL issued, this just got announced this morning, the longest suspension for an on-field act in NFL history. I'm going to try my best to say the name right. Vontaze Perfect. Yeah, right. Yeah. 2 previous times he'd gotten suspended for 4 games. They hit this time. They're setting him down for the rest of the year pending the appeal. Do you have a thought on that one way or the other?
Yeah, he's been a notoriously dirty player for several years. I think the NFL has long since needed to take the action that they've finally taken with him. and it should hopefully send a message to other players that repeated violations of roughness rules are not going to be tolerated. I will say too, though, that we were watching the Thursday night game, Green Bay Philadelphia. Early in that game, there was a cheap shot. I believe it was a Philadelphia defender on a Green Bay player, and it knocked the Green Bay player out of the game, and the Philadelphia player got a flag. It was eventually picked up, though, because it was determined he was a ball carrier, and even though the hit was late and such, so not only the Green Bay running back got knocked out of the game, there was not even a 15-yard penalty for it, and the guy kept playing the game. I turned the game off because that's not football, and the NFL is taking such a lax attitude to this. The Buffalo-New England game yesterday, there was a similar situation. There was the quarterback Josh Allen hit late on a scramble out of bounds, no flag. There was a flag, but the player was not ejected, and then there was also offsetting penalties on the play, and so Buffalo lost its starting quarterback on a play that didn't even result in any kind of effective penalty on New England. And then on that drive, Matt Barkley comes in as the backup quarterback. There is no third quarterback dressed for the game for Buffalo. And Kyle Van Noa, I'm trying to think who it was for New England that did this. But there was a play that Buffalo ran. They ran a backwards pass, double pass basically kind of play. And after Barkley threw the ball, he was hit late, very late, egregiously late. And knocked to the ground, and again, no flag. And what are we doing here? We're claiming that we are valuing the players, their long-term health, their long-term head health, but it seems to me to be a very easy thing to do. If a player is knocked out of a game because of a personal foul to the head. And they should be. As soon as there's any kind of hard hit to the head, I don't think that player should be back in the game. Fair or not, that's their long-term health more important than the short-term of a football game. But if a personal foul leads to a player being taken out of the game for observation related to a possible head injury, the perpetrating player who calls that should automatically be ejected. I don't think there's anything to argue on that. And if they don't do that, it's lip service to the health of the players. It's ridiculous. And so I turned the Green Bay Philadelphia game off. I was turned off by the NFL's laxness in dealing with what they think is the health of their players. I just don't care to watch games that are as dirty as we're still seeing NFL games being played.
Kudos to the NFL for taking a again third time offender. When I first read the story, not realizing he'd had this happen twice before, you're going, oh, okay, well they're stepping it up a little bit, but I think this time they would have had to, because it is the third time in a very short period of time that this guy has done that. So I agree. I'm glad that they made that decision. I got two quick notes, and then I got two baseball things to wrap it up with, because I know how passionate you are about baseball. First one is two non-baseball ones that made me smile. That the Sacramento Kings are playing a game, an NBA game, first one's ever played in India. And they're actually going to fly on the jet that Drake owns, that he named Air Drake. So that one made me smile, that I guess people that run in those kinds of circles know each other. So the Sacramento Kings are going to fly, I think it's a 22-hour flight when they play the first ever games in India. Thought it was kind of neat to see Drake, be able to work that out with him. The other one was that the Mystics take game one at home in the championship series. They got swept last year, so it was good to see them get a win in at home. They're up 1-0. They play again tomorrow night. Chris, I got two baseball ones for you. One of them is going to be a thought process. The other will be a breakdown. These will be the last two that I have for you. First one, the Cubs and Joe Madden. The second one, tell us how excited you are about the Nats Brewers for tomorrow night.
Yeah. Joe Madden, from the surface, He's the guy who won the World Series for the Cubs, just like Terry Francona won the World Series for the Red Sox. And eventually, though, things run their course. I say this a lot, and it's usually more about football than it is about baseball. But, at some point, if for example, Madden is a famously player-friendly manager. He's not a hard ass. He's a guy that, he's notoriously not notorious. That's a bad term. He's noteworthy for, just being a very easy guy to work with. That was the key. At all of his stops. I think he was a bench coach with the Angels. He had great success with Tampa Bay, and of course with the Cubs the last 5 years. But there was a feeling in Chicago, at least expressed by the front office after last season, that I wouldn't call last season a collapse, except that they did end up just getting the wild card, and then they lost the wild card game. And so there was a sense that was relayed to him. Hey Joe, we need you to be a little more detail oriented, a little more focused and stricter kind of guy. And he's just not that guy. And so it'll be interesting to see how they replace him with, because if you replace him with another player-friendly manager, then you've kind of defeated the purpose. He is the best. He's one of the best minds in baseball. Him and Buck Showalter, to me, are at the top of the game as far as managerial candidate possibility kind of guys. He won't be unemployed for very long. I'm understanding that the Los Angeles Angels are already angling. They've already gotten rid of their manager, Brad Ausmus, after 1 year. That move, if not already, by the not too long after this podcast, I think we're going to hear that Joe Madden has got another job already. But so it looks weird. Here's the guy who won the World Series that Cubs fans have been waiting their lifetimes for. But his style had run its course. The Nats. It's a wild card game, so I am more nervous. This is the first time I've been this nervous over a sporting event since April. Certain couple games played in Minneapolis. I'm very fortunate. I mentioned a few minutes ago, but that my wife is also a big sports fan. We watch the Nats literally every night, all summer long. From the time, basically, we got back from Minneapolis. we have watched Nats games every night when they play. We've gone up a few times. We go make it a point to go up to DC to watch games. When we're not there, we're watching the games and saying, "Damn it, there are people in that stadium eating pork tachos right now that we should be eating. If we lived closer to DC, we'd be there every night." And so they play tomorrow night. It's a one and done scenario. And my wife is saying, "That's no fair. Why do we have to play a one and done?" And I said, "Crystal, remember, we got on a plane and flew to Minneapolis for 2 one and done games. So that's the way this is. It's a one and done." I love the fact that, for better or for worse, Max Scherzer is the guy getting the ball. He's not been great lately since he came back from the injured list. 2-2 record, 4.74 ERA. You have two candidates to get to start. Steven Strasburg would be on turn based on rest. And Strasburg, 18 wins this year, a low 3s ERA. Patrick Corbin, a low 3s ERA, 15 wins this year. But, Max Scherzer is Jim Leland said this on a radio show last week, and this is before the decision was announced by Davey Martinez. He was going to go with Max Scherzer. Jim Leland, famous, he was with the Pirates. He took the Pirates to a couple of NLCSs. He took the Tigers to the World Series. He was asked, all the guys you've managed, you have a one game that you have to win. Who's starting for you? Without hesitation, he said Max. So Scherzer gets the ball. It's still 28 hours until the first pitch. I've got a soccer game to broadcast tomorrow. I am on pins and needles right now. I wish they were playing right now. They're a wild card this year. They've won 4 division titles in the last 7 years. But this wild card team has been the most fun I've ever seen. This group, when they hit a home run, they do a conga line dance in the dugout. Gerardo Parra is hitting 230 for them, but he started walking up to the plate. His walk-up song was the Baby Shark song. when he does that, there are 40,000 fans in Nats Park doing the baby shark with him. This group has fun. They're fun to watch, and as a result, it's fun to be a fan of them. And I think that Bryce Harper not being there is a big part of that. He was not a fun player for other people to be around. Since he left, that group's fun. It's fun to go to games. It's fun to watch them on TV. And I just hope that I get one game tomorrow night and then at least 5 more against the Dodgers. That's tomorrow night and then another week of baseball. 3 weeks of baseball, even better. But I am as nervous as I've been since UVA played Texas Tech about this game tomorrow night, Jerry.
It's awesome to know that you've got at least the one game, and I will agree with you. I find them more likable. I don't follow them to the level that you follow them, and I wouldn't have thought that necessarily when Harper was gone. But we talked a couple of weeks ago about the addition by subtraction, and they do look like that they're enjoying themselves for sure. It's been a fun ride. And I'm with you. I hope that they get this one and get to play the Dodgers. I got to admit, I'm impressed. When Yelich went down, I thought the Brewers would pack up and go home. I was incredibly impressed that they have hung the way that they did, and not only won the other wild card, but took the Cardinals to the last day of the season to actually win the division. So it's gonna be fun. That's a baseball coming up. And, again, you mentioned some soccer. We've got a situation where we've got our first full week of nothing but ACC games. We've got 4 games to take a look at for this week. And then we've also got, kind of amazingly, 6 teams with a bye at the same time. So it'll be an interesting week for football. I'm sure we'll get to talk a little bit about how the wild card games went. And try to enjoy the week off from the Who's football game, and then we'll see what happens when they go down to Miami and play the big question mark on the Hurricane name.
Yeah, I am running on fumes right now in some respects. I did 3 broadcasts this weekend, 2 soccer, 1 football. I've got today off, and then I've got 1 more soccer broadcast tomorrow. Then from a broadcasting perspective, I'm actually off for 24 days. I've got 3 in a row, 3 games in 3 days there too. But boy, it's been I've got a voice. I still have a voice, which is interesting. After a long day on Saturday, especially, and then 2 soccer games. So I think that'll wrap us up. Well, thank you, Jerry, as always, for your contributions to the podcast. Thanks to our listeners out there for staying with us today. And Jerry and I will be back Friday. I've got some more podcasts coming up this week. But in the meantime, have a great day, everybody.